Hey everybody, welcome to episode 11 of my Musical Moments series. Can you believe it's already 11? 11 weeks I've been doing this. Gosh, I've learned a lot. I've actually kind of learned how to put a video together, and now I don't stress so much about how the heck this thing's gonna come together, so that's really nice. And in honor of 11 and looking ahead to my next 10 episodes, I thought we would do something for a first. And this is our very first Composer Smackdown. It's gonna be very exciting. I have my little first verses. We have none other than Tchaikovsky versus Beethoven. That's right, so super excited to have the opportunity to share this little bit of competition. You know, I'm all about friendly competition. Even when I'm conducting, I like to have a little friendly competition between the different sections sometimes. I think it brings out the best in people and kind of helps to break the monotony. Now, the question is, how do you compare two different composers' works, especially considering, you know, they kind of lived in different times? Spoiler alert, you can't really compare them, but you know what? I thought, gosh, wouldn't it be fun to try? Spoiler alert number 2, we're going to focus on the orchestral music. Not a surprise, I know. I mean, we're going to talk a little bit about opera and a little bit about ballet, but obviously the orchestral music is the stuff that I know well, and the chamber music, there is a ton of it, and it's not particularly my specialty, so you know, someone else should make that video. Have at it. I'll watch that video if you make it. So if you think you're up on Tchaikovsky and Beethoven's chamber music, put it out there. Let's see it. I think that'd be really interesting, but for today, mostly the orchestral music, little ballet, little opera mixed in there too. We have, on the one hand, Ludwig van Beethoven, 1770 to 1827. So he lived to be 57 years old. On the other hand, we have Tchaikovsky, 1840 to 1893, 57 and 53 respectively. So similar lives, but let's look at how many pieces. It's a little hard to count that because some things get rearranged and reused, broken up and cut from other things, etc. But Beethoven, more than 750 pieces during his lifetime. If you look at Tchaikovsky, just a quick count, you end up with around 177 pieces. That's a lot. And again, those are sort of loose guesses because again, it's hard to sort of enumerate those things. But we're looking at a lot more music for Beethoven, of course. So we're going to start with some of the smaller things, and that would be ballet. Beethoven really didn't write a lot of ballet. He has the overture and the ballet music from Creatures of Prometheus. So in that, not a huge contribution and not a huge body of music to judge by. Tchaikovsky, on the other hand, he wrote 3 ballets. They are Swan Lake, Sleeping Beauty, and a little thing called the Nutcracker. So not bad. If you're going to write 3 ballets, those would be the 3 that you'd want to write. We could go into the details, but I think we'll just give Tchaikovsky this one to start. The nod goes to Tchaikovsky here. Now, in the opera world, Beethoven wrote 1, Fidelio. He worked on it and revised it most of his life for many, many years. Flashes of incredible brilliance in it, of course, but its reputation even today is a little uneven. Tchaikovsky, on the other hand, 11 operas, 2 of which, Eugene Onegin and The Queen of Spades, are really considered masterworks. So again, without going that much deeper, I think we have to give the nod to Tchaikovsky. Now, before you say, oh my gosh, Bruce, what are you gonna do? Just give everything to Tchaikovsky and Tchaikovsky's gonna run away with your little mock competition? No, I'm not going to do that, and that's not what's going to happen. And let's be fair, like those were 2 of the smaller things. Most of what we're going to talk about today is the concertos and the symphonies. So let's look at the concertos. Tchaikovsky wrote 3 piano concertos, 1 violin concerto, and the cello concerto, which is the Rococo variations. Of those major pieces, 2 of those, the violin concerto and the first piano concerto, have continued to influence composers. Audiences adore them. They continue to be played all the time. Unquestionably masterworks. There's a few other supporting pieces as well, the Waltz Scherzo, the Serenade Melancholique, and the Concert Fantasia for piano and orchestra. Nice pieces, but nothing particularly really groundbreaking. Beethoven, on the other hand, of course, 5 piano concertos, a violin concerto, and the triple concerto, of course. Of that, pretty much all the piano concertos are great, and you'd probably say, yeah, the violin concerto, unquestionably a masterwork. The triple concerto, is either incredibly good or excellent by those standards. Beethoven also has some smaller works. There's the 2 romances for violin and orchestra, the rondo for piano and orchestra, and of course the choral fantasy, which who knows what that thing is. It's for piano and choir and orchestra and 4 soloists. It's kind of everything. It's sometimes called the poor man's ninth because it's kind of a sketch about how to do a theme and variations maybe, and it has this repeating theme that sounds a little bit like Beethoven 9. I kind of think it's awesome, but at the same time it's kind of really trashy, but I kind of love it and I think it's great. But I don't think you'd call that one of the masterworks. But hey, 5 great piano concertos, 1 great violin concerto, and a probably great triple concerto. So Beethoven gets the point. So things are starting to even out a little bit, right? Now let's look at the daddy of them all, the main work that we're going to judge composers by, and that's the symphonies. So you probably know a little bit about Beethoven's symphonies. He wrote 9 of them. They are all pretty much great, with special mention, of course, to 3, 5, 7, and 9. We don't know why it's the odd ones, but come on, those are truly some of the most influential, greatest achievements in Western classical music, unquestionably. That's quite a pedigree. Tchaikovsky's symphonies, he wrote 7. We're going to count Manfred's Symphony as a symphony, so that 4, 5, and 6, unquestionably great works, for sure. The other symphonies, they're at least interesting. I'm looking at you, 3. But sometimes good or even very good, 2, and maybe sometimes 1 as well. But taken as a whole, I think his lesser symphonies are probably not as great as Beethoven's lesser symphonies. So, as you can probably guess then, again, this is highly subjective, but I'm going to give the nod to Beethoven here. So, it looks like we kind of have sort of an even match here, right? We've got Tchaikovsky in opera and ballet, and we've got Beethoven in concertos and symphonies. But maybe it's a little more complex than that. Maybe it's a little more subtle than that in how we look at these different genres. Now, I think you could argue that symphonies should be weighted a little more heavily. They're sort of the pinnacle of artistic achievement for a composer. So I think you can make an argument that, well, maybe you'd give them a little bit of an extra weight in our system of comparison. You could definitely make an argument for that. The other thing to look at is in the ballet category. I'm not sure it's really fair to judge Beethoven and Tchaikovsky because they wrote in such different periods of time. In Beethoven's time, there weren't really classical composers who were writing a ton of ballet music. And even 70 years later, by the time that Tchaikovsky was doing it, most composers who wrote ballet specialized only in that and are not known today for their symphonies. He was really one of the first composers to cross over, and it just so happened that he had this incredibly natural gift for color, orchestration, and of course melody. So those things combined really made Tchaikovsky's ballet music incredibly successful and memorable. Truth be told, those productions weren't necessarily giant hits when they first came out, but they have really endured over time for sure because of the power of the music, which certainly, like if you look at like the Black Swan, other recent events, and the way that Nutcracker has really penetrated the popular consciousness. But again, people weren't commissioning Beethoven to write ballet music in the same way. So I'm not sure you can really compare that part of it either. So that might be even a case to push Beethoven a little bit further, I think. So although on the surface, it looks like we have a tie, and I think that's fair to say. But I also think people might say, well, taken as a whole, you might say, well, Beethoven is maybe more influential as a composer. And the other thing that I think is fair to note is that Tchaikovsky's reputation after his death has come and gone. And it's kind of gone through periods when he is really adored, and then other periods where he's thought to be a little over the top, and it was all kind of just put it out there. Whereas Beethoven's reputation since that time has really been just absolutely sterling, no stopping it. Now, that doesn't mean I love the music of Tchaikovsky any less, but that's sort of a nice comparison. Not surprisingly, though, I'm going to call this a draw. I mean, we are definitely talking about 2 of the greatest composers in the history of Western classical music. Both of these composers wrote unquestionably great works, transcendent works that last centuries, and we're still listening to them and talking about them and celebrating them, and audiences are adoring them. And these aren't, these weren't like a one-off. Oh, I got lucky and wrote a great piece and I don't even know why. These composers' output as a whole showed consistent quality like this. So I think it's easy to say that we're talking about two equal geniuses. But I do think it's kind of fun to compare their outputs, their efforts, and their reputations to sort of put them up against each other in this way. So let me know what you think. I'm sure there are things I've said that you disagree with. You're like, what? You think that piece is great? Ridiculous. Or how could you not include X? You may do any of that except chamber music, because I didn't talk about it. So anything else that I've mentioned is fair game, but I really want to know what you think. Let me know what you think your favorite pieces are, and maybe I was unfair to one of these composers in one of these genres. Really interested in what your comments might be. So if you haven't done so already, click like and click subscribe if you're not already a subscriber. Heck, I'm already up to number 11, so you know there's gonna be one of these probably every Monday. And if you have maybe two composers that you'd like to see me compare, let me know what those are so we can do our next little composer smackdown with those composers. Always anxious for your feedback. Until then, check out some of my other videos if you get a chance, and I will see you next week. How are you going to compare two composers? I mean, spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. He was born 1840 and died in 17... hello. Hey, get out of there. Put me down.